Thank you, Deborah, for that overview of many ways you can prepare directives for your final moments and even for after death. Now we're going to hear from Carol Johnson. She's an attorney in St. Petersburg, but I guess also in South Carolina. She does estate planning also. Her practice focuses not only on estate and wealth management, but especially for the families of disabled children and adults, providing special needs trusts and planning for current and future care of a disabled family member. Ms. Johnson has an autistic son, and he is the inspiration for her practice. We're going to hear from Carol Johnson.
Hi, everybody. Carol Johnson. I am so happy to be here. Tony's going to hand out some handouts, and unfortunately they didn't get stapled. So you may have to do some work on actually getting them sorted together. The second thing is, this handout is an overview. Boy, you're kind of short too. It's more an overview of everything that I researched on this topic. I'm going to talk to you more specifically about special needs because a lot of you have special needs family members, children. Show of hands, anyone that knows anybody in your family that is disabled? Yeah, that's quite a few of you. Okay, so I'm going to tell you a story right before I get started here. I have a client. I used to do what's called special needs trusts, which is just the document itself, which will allow people to properly leave their estate and their wealth and their legacy to their child without interfering with their eligibility for medical benefits from the government, which is an important thing. So I changed the name of what I do to special needs planning because of a client that I had. I had this client, her father was a doctor, very intelligent man, knew she had special needs, had it all her life. Wife died. He was the last to go. And no one seemed to know what to do with her. She had a trust, but no one seemed to know about her until she ended up in the hospital. Because she couldn't feed herself, she couldn't take care of herself, she didn't know. There was no plan in place. So that's the big thing to take away too, is if you have a special needs family member or anyone that becomes a special needs family member, you don't want just a trust, you want the plan. You want to plan for the aftercare when you pass away, when something happens to you, who is going to take care of that child. And personally, I took it to heart. As Marcia said, I have an autistic son. He is with me now. He's very bright, but still, autistics don't generally find good long-term work because other people don't really understand them the way I do. But I do know exactly what's going to happen after I die. I have it written down. I not only have a letter of intent, which I suggest people do not only for yourselves, but for your children. If you don't want great Aunt Thelma, who is uber religious, born again, Baptist 3 times over, to be taking care of your child, you need to think about it, because that may be what happens if you don't do some of the documents that Deborah was talking about, the designation of the pre-need guardian. If you don't establish those things, the court will decide who gets your kid, not who you would think to get them. The court will decide. The court does take a look at a designation of pre-need guardian, and that will hold sway for them. All of these advanced directives have come about over time through court cases. The one that I like the most to bring up is the Nancy Cruzan case. Nancy was vegetative, The hospital wanted to keep her on feeding tubes and et cetera. Her family wanted her taken off and went to court to find out if that could happen. But the court said there was not enough evidence that she really would want to be off of these things. She really would want to live like this for the rest of her life. I can't even imagine. Mom finally prevailed. She took it to the Supreme Court. And they said, okay, as you know, we think that first they ruled against her, saying it wasn't clear and convincing, and then they found more evidence, and they were able to get the plug pulled on Nancy and let her go. But what that ended up doing is now people know that they have to set up these living documents. They have to set them up ahead of time. And what it is I'm going to give you a little bit of a legal lesson here. Deborah talked about intent. Okay, so how do you prove something? What is the barrier for proof? Well, there's what you call the breadth, the extra breadth on one side of the scale. That's preponderance of the evidence. If you have a scale that is just tipped in one little tiny direction, that's enough evidence for that. And that's for mostly civil stuff. This requires clear and convincing. That means that you have to have a document signed when you are competent, and it has to have been witnessed by somebody. Someone else had to have seen it, and they had to say, yep, she knew what she was doing when she did it. It can't be something where you're already sitting there like, and somebody grabs your hand and signs it and says, see, she signed it. No, it has to be clear and convincing, so do it now. Second one is beyond all reasonable doubt, or beyond a reasonable doubt. Most people think it's beyond all reasonable doubt, or just beyond doubt, period, which is where that's criminal. We don't have to worry about that. Beyond that, your child, if you have a disabled child, usually cannot speak for themselves. So if they have or you have religious preferences and you don't want this child raised in an uber religious setting, you don't want this child going to a Catholic school and being forced to take on all of the Catholic minions and roles and things that they have to do, you must state it in a letter of intent. And that becomes part of their trust. And what you do is you have the trust refer to it. A trustee is a person who's a fiduciary. That means that they have a responsibility to carry out those trust directions to the letter. That's your saving grace. You set up one of those, you have a letter of intent referred to in the trust, and you make sure that the person you assign as the trustee is of a similar mind frame that you are, and is not just someone who's going to go, oh yeah, I'll do that, and then walk away and drag the kid along to church and whatnot. But that's the best way that you can protect them. And I'm being terrible about doing this. I can't chew gum and walk. So now we have the hospitals, and I loved the talk about the hospitals because I also work with a lot of doctors that take care of dying patients. And I had one of the doctors come to me recently, and she was just all up in arms because one of the local hospitals, and it was not a Catholic hospital, but one of the local hospitals had a patient that was had signed a living will, had a do not resuscitate order in, everything was taken care of, but the patient had been there for 5.5 years. She was catatonic from Alzheimer's, and she had Parkinson's so bad she was crippled, completely crippled. They discovered she was having a heart attack. How? Because they checked her blood, and the blood showed that she was having a heart attack. And my doctor friend says, oh my God, thank goodness she can finally pass away. She was 85 years old. She'd been living like this for 5 years. Her 86-year-old husband said, no. He said, I took care of her for 5 years. I can take care of her for another 5. And the doctor's going, but she wants to die. And she took it up to the ethics council of the hospital, and they said, yes, she does want to die. We recognize that. But if we don't do what her husband says, he will sue us. She couldn't sue. She was completely disabled. No one was there to speak for her. So that's why it's so important to get a good surrogate that will do what you want them to do and won't do what they want to do. And the unfortunate thing was that they fell down on their swords and they would not allow her to die, so she's still alive. They actually operated on her to put stents in, and she is still alive. Yeah, because the husband wanted to and he could sue. Okay, what about, we spoke about Aunt Thelma, who has these religious beliefs. What about her? She knows you're an atheist. She knows you're an agnostic. She knows you're a humanist. She doesn't care. She thinks if you're going to die, she's afraid that you are going to hell. And she wants to come in and give you the last opportunity on your last breath to save yourself. That's where a good surrogate comes in. You tell your surrogate, I don't want Aunt Ethel to be able to darken my doorstep with her cross in hand, certainly not with her priest. Please keep her out. A good surrogate will do that. And then there's also the other option. And that's kind of the option that I take. I have family members that are Buddhists and this and that and the other. And if they want to come and shake some straw over my head or whatever, I just don't care. If that makes them happier, fine. Doesn't bother me at all. But I know some people just don't want to hear it. They don't want to be part of it. So make sure your surrogate knows if that's important to you. Okay, so the things that you should do right now. A very, very, very comprehensive living will. Most of the living wills out there are not sufficient. They're horrible. They don't say enough. They just say, if I am terminally ill. Well, what if you're not? What if you are not terminally ill? What if you're just in there and you've had such severe brain damage that you will never, ever walk again? You're in a persistent vegetative state. Do you want to be kept alive? No. So you need to specify that. There's little spaces down there. Make sure that your attorney drafts this will so that it specifies everything that you don't want. That you don't want the chaplain coming in every 5 minutes, that you don't want to be prayed over, that you don't want the feeding tubes and whatever. Everything has to be written down. Oh, what about your doctor? We've talked about hospitals. There are some doctors out there that have religious sensibilities too. And it's always a good idea, especially if you're getting a new doctor, to just say, look, I'm a humanist. What are you? If he says, I'm a born-again Christian, just say, bye. There's always other doctors out there. Okay, so what I've given you in my packet is a sample living will, a sample of instructions for your surrogate. And that was, I found that online, Dr. Bruce T. Flann. It was his directives for a surrogate, and I thought it was brilliant. It should be on page 9, 10, or 11 in your handout. But it's things that you might want your surrogate to know for the future, for when you can't speak for yourself. And your letter of intent. Do the letter of intent for your children, for you. Make sure that all of your family knows about it and knows where it is. That's it.